Hello, welcome to Headlines. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. President of the United States, Donald Trump, outlined a straightforward foreign policy. His administration focuses on three main principles: securing U.S. national interests, boosting American strengths and leadership, as well as enhancing economic prosperity through trade. Trump plans to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria, and his decision to freeze on foreign development assistance raised big concern among international organizations, including the United Nations. As a presidential candidate, Donald Trump promised to end the war in Ukraine, but it's not like closing a business deal. Criticism of NATO spending also remains, with Trump pushing for more European responsibility in defense. The U.S. strategy also includes confronting Chinese expansion, which is seen as a significant threat to global security, as evidenced in talks about Greenland and the Panama Canal. More on this issue in my program right now. Joining me from Spain is Gustavo de Aristegui, former member of parliament and former ambassador. We're welcome to our program.
Thank you so much, Anastasia.
Thank you very much. So a lot has been discussed regarding U.S. foreign policy under the Trump administration. As someone who personally knows the recently appointed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, what should we expect as the first major shift in the U.S. foreign policy moving forward?
Well, I think that there is, I'd like to begin with a phrase that was revealed to me by a colleague in a thought forum that I go to, that is called The Circle, who is Chris Stewart, a former member of Congress, who is also a retired Air Force colonel and is a very close friend of President Trump. And he made probably the most intelligent remark on President Trump that I have heard in the last 10 years, probably. He said that President Trump should be taken seriously, but not literally. And unfortunately, the majority of countries in the world, be it allies or foes, take him literally, but not seriously. Trump means what he says, but sometimes he words it in such a way that people think that he is going to do something, and in fact, what he is doing is gaining a position of strength for a future negotiation. Marco Rubio is a very solid, well-structured person, knows the subject of foreign policy very well, has been a member of the Senate for 14 years, member of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate for all of that time, and has also been a member of the Intelligence Committee of the Senate. So he has traveled the world, seen all the world leaders at what can imagine, has met with all the foreign ministers of the most important countries in the world, and knows the issues that trouble our world, that are threats to peace, security, stability in the planet, and are not only a problem of the West or the United States, but are actually a problem of mankind. These are terrorism, organized crime, migration, human being trafficking, organized crime, especially related to drug trafficking and arms trafficking. There is, of course, a very clear thing. The new Secretary of State very clearly stated it. The 21st century is going to be centered or defined even by the rivalry between the United States and China. This is not the choice of the West. This is not the choice of the United States. For many decades even, since the revolution of Deng Xiaoping, when China began its shift from a brutal Maoist regime into a communist regime with a capitalist system, they started calling the West their enemy. The West has never called China an enemy, has always called it a competitor, an adversary at worst, or normally a rival, especially when it comes to the influence and penetration of regions of interest to both the West or China, which can be Africa, Latin America, or Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is a lost cause for China. There are more foes in that region of the world, more enemies of China, more countries that are deeply suspicious of the aggressiveness and the expansionism of China than there are friends of China. The only one that is probably left is Myanmar, and we know what that is. Even communist regimes like Vietnam are declared foes of China. And the problem that China has is a very fragile, and I would even say vulnerable, economy based entirely on exports. And these exports necessarily have to come or go through the Strait of Malacca, which is dominated by countries that are either allies of the West, either enemies of China, or both things at the same time. So this is one thing. You mentioned Panama, the Panama Canal, and you mentioned Greenland. All of these things are related. You see, everything has a geopolitical or a geostrategic reason, and there is always also a geoeconomics reason behind it. Let's start with the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal was returned to Panama under very strict and precise conditions. The lawyers of the State Department, not only Marco Rubio, and the lawyers that had been counseling him before he was sworn in as Secretary of State of the United States of America, were saying that the conditions of retrocession of the Canal of Panama from the United States to Panama could have been violated. And the reason being that the canal has to be internationally neutral, and it has to be open constantly. And there has to be an absolute guarantee of influx and outflux of boats in both sense, be it from the Atlantic to the Pacific or the Pacific to the Atlantic, to guarantee the stability and the flow of international trade that goes through the Canal of Panama in a very constant way. But recently, there has been some hindrances and some obstacles for ships of the West, and most specifically of the United States of America. Not only the US Navy, but even merchant ships. So Marco Rubio in his confirmation hearings made a very troubling statement. He said that he had flown with military aircraft over the Canal of Panama, and they had noticed that on both sides of the canal, both in the entry and the exit, depending on how you look at it, Atlantic side or Pacific side, there were a growing number of Chinese companies that were state-owned and that could very well be transformed into choking points so that they could probably strangle the world economy and definitely the passage, the safe passage, the neutral passage of both Navy ships of the United States and merchant ships of the United States. And lastly, and then over to you, is the affair related to Greenland. It is no secret that Russia and China have navies that are completely choked or completely blocked in their territorial waters because a lot of rival, enemy, competing countries are necessary to go through their waters. So it is very complicated for example, Russia. The Baltic fleet has to go out through the Baltic Sea, and there are 9 countries that are at the shore of the Baltic Sea. 8 of these 9 countries are members of NATO. So that already tells you everything. The Russian fleet of the Black Sea is in Crimea, Sebastopol, and to go back into open waters in the Mediterranean, it has to go through the Black Sea, the Bosphorus Strait, then the Dardanelles Strait, the Sea of Marmara, and into territorial waters of Turkey, NATO country, then Greece, NATO country, then Italy, NATO country, France, Spain, etc., all of them NATO members. It is a very complicated situation for them. And even I've just been in Japan, and even in the Eastern Fleet, the Pacific Fleet of Russia, is in Vladivostok. Vladivostok is right across the island of Hokkaido. That is the Sea of Japan. The Sea of Japan is almost like a lake. For the Russian fleet to be able to go out, it has to do it through the north, surrounding the island of Hokkaido, or through the south, doing it through Okinawa. In Okinawa, there is an American naval base, Air Force and naval base, and in Hokkaido, it is absolutely full of Navy and Air Force of Japan that is an ally of the United States. So you're seeing here that one of the main issues is both strategic and economic, and both China and Russia have that problem. If you want, after your comments, I will make an analysis about how China is going into the conquest of the main sources of critical raw materials of rare earth and energy, both in Africa and in Latin America, securing mining rights with many countries over there. And for example, expelling the French and the Western powers in the Sahel, especially in countries like Mali, Niger, or Burkina Faso that have very interesting mining possibilities, especially in the production of uranium, that, as you know, is essential for both nuclear energy and the nuclear and nuclear weaponry.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for such a detailed answer to my first question. I decided not to interrupt you as you partially answered some of my questions I prepared for our today's discussion. Some issues to be confirmed. Trump's focus on U.S. sovereignty and security. He made a statement that these issues are among the top priorities. Therefore, how does it coincide with his statement when he's saying about Panama Canal, or about intention to buy Greenland, for example, or even to make Canada as one of the states of the United States of America, if he is talking at the same time about the territorial integrity and sovereignty, important issues, not only for the United States, but also, I think, for other countries as well. The second issue is about China. We do remember about even how it was called trade war between two superpowers, United States and China, during the first term of presidency Donald Trump, and now China again among the top priorities for a new administration of Donald Trump. He tries to explain to the global power that will be the most probably interesting, but at the same time difficult path for everyone to understand how two superpowers will move forward. Do you think this approach of a new administration will lead to a more secure world or create foundation for a conflict? If there is a direct confrontation between China and the United States of America, doesn't matter, in Africa, in the region where the Russia and Ukraine war continues, in Europe when it comes to the Trump tariffs policy, I do expect United States and China will have some confrontation in this side as well. So do you expect it will bring us to a more secure world?
Please. Let me start with the last comment that you've made. I believe that what we're seeing right now is the confirmation that any kind of appeasement or any kind of cessions to an aggressive power that is expansionist is only inviting conflict. I actually believe that anyone that has in the past believed that not doing anything in the face of China's expansionism in the South China Sea, not doing anything while seeing that China is building aero-naval bases and artificial islands are being built all around the South China Sea to expand in an artificial way the territorial waters of China well into the realm or the boundaries of countries like Vietnam, Thailand, or even Philippines, where the clashes or the incidents between trawlers and fishing boats and the Chinese Coast Guard, which is as powerful as many normal mid-sized navies in the world or more. So I truly believe that a firm response to this expansionism is the prevention of conflict and not the fueling of conflict.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm sorry, just a short remark, but we should expect China also to react on any action on behalf of the United States.
Of course, but the thing is that we haven't done it in the West. You see, when we all, I am a career diplomat. I served as a diplomat in my youth, and then I went into politics, becoming a member of parliament, and then I went back into foreign service and became an ambassador. But what I mean is that in a country like mine that belongs to the West, that is a member of NATO, a member of the European Union, and a strong believer in the transatlantic relationship, very strong ties in Latin America. We believe truly that there is only one China. But that one China needs to accept that if Taiwan, being a part of China, has a different political system, that political system of freedom and human rights and free elections has to be respected. In the same way that when the United Kingdom gave back Hong Kong to China in 1997, it was under those conditions that have not been respected. So what we see is that if ever the one China policy were to be implemented as far as Taiwan would be concerned, we can expect that those conditions of one country, two systems will never be respected as they were not respected with Hong Kong. This is one thing.
Mr. Ambassador, before you starting answering my next point made before, don't you think that if United States, Donald Trump's administration, try to speak more about the issue of Taiwan and trying to somehow interfere, China will consider it as an intervention to the domestic issues. In a vice versa, China may decide also to comment on some domestic issues in the United States of America. Therefore, what will be their reaction on that?
Well, I think that China is already doing it. But you see, the thing is that I know that all countries are defending their interests as they best feel necessary. But one thing is to defend your interests, and the other thing is to do it in conflict or in injury and in prejudice of the countries that are in front of you. The expansionism of China in the South China Sea and the expansionism of China in the Southeast Asia, or for example, the constant skirmishes with the Indian forces in all along the Sino-Indian borders, or the tensions in Indian Kashmir that has 30,000 square kilometers that are occupied by China and 80,000 square kilometers occupied by Pakistan. And let me tell you that this is if there is a route for conflict in the world beyond the United States, China is right there, what I mentioned. Kashmir is the only place on the planet where three nuclear powers have land borders and have forces that are facing each other every day, and where every day you have skirmishes. When you were saying that the Chinese would be entitled to comment on internal politics of the United States, everybody does it. I'm sure that it happens in Azerbaijan. I'm sure that it happens everywhere. It happens in my country, in Spain. It happens in Morocco, where I normally live. It happens in Germany, in Japan, or in Australia. Everybody.
Right, but I'm sorry, but there is also another issue and concern of the spending military equipment or militants to Taiwan, for example. If we speak about comments and support of any regime or any country, that can be considered as an intervention to the domestic issues.
Well, let me tell you that one of the basic geostrategic problems that China is facing, and this is in abundance of the nationalist claims over the island of Taiwan. China, all of its naval bases, which are on the coast of the Pacific, because of the continental platform being so shallow, when the submarines of China, be it attack submarines or missile carrying submarines, go out of their bases until they reach deep waters, they are perfectly controllable by satellites. They know it. So the only way that they can have access to deep waters immediately is if they take over Taiwan and they build on the east coast of the island a naval base where they will put their submarines, and immediately after they submerge, going out of the base, they will go into deep water and not be detectable at all. This is one of the main questions, and it has nothing to do with an intervention or non-intervention. I mean, I think that the only ones that are saying we are going to invade Taiwan. We are always doing all kinds of exercises in and around the island. The ones that are harassing the Vietnamese, the Thais, the Laosians, and the Filipinos, for example, or the Australians, for that much, are the Chinese. Let's not forget either that they were trying to set foot in Sri Lanka, and that has gone wrong because, of course, their ally has not only been kicked out of power but is indicted for serious crimes of corruption and abuse of power. We're talking about President Rajapaksa, the former President Rajapaksa, or in the Maldives, where, of course, we're talking that these countries are extremely sensible for a country like India. And India is not an ally of the West. It's an independent country that belongs to the non-aligned movement, and they are also very concerned about this aggressive expansionism of China. If China goes back to a reasonable, balanced way of interacting with other countries, not only the West, I'm talking about China, I'm talking about India or their neighbors of the Southeast, or even Australia, then we can seriously believe that that phrase that was so famous in the 90s and the beginning of this century, when the Chinese always said that we aspire to have a harmonious China, harmonious world. Well, today, maybe China is harmonious, I don't know. That is for them to decide, but it's definitely not a harmonious world, and it's basically due to many things, but they're not contributing to the harmony of the world.
Well, I guess, and you will agree with me, Trump's most challenging deal yet, ending the war in Ukraine. What's your primary concern regarding this?
My primary concern is that the Russian aggression in Ukraine cannot go unnoticed or unpunished. It cannot go without consequences. The fact that, for example, the Russians took over unlawfully, aggressively, and inventing separatist movements in South Ossetia or Abkhazia in 2008 already shows what kind of action plan they have. They took over those regions. They incorporated those regions, saying that they were independent countries, which they're not, and now they're a part of Russia in 2008, and absolutely nothing happened. Nobody reacted. So they took note and thought that they can get away with anything or under any circumstance. In 2014, they invaded and took over Crimea, and they had some completely useless sanctions imposed on them. Nothing happened. The Europeans continued to buy cheap oil and gas from Russia, and we build the gas pipes and the oil pipes to get this oil and gas in a very efficient and cost-effective way, and they were built and financed by us. So we became junkies. We became drug addicts of cheap Russian oil and gas. And it is our fault, because right now we are fueling the aggressiveness of Russia. We are fueling the very advanced weapons program of Russia. Let's not forget that Russia already is building sixth generation fighter bombers. And this is a reality. The West is barely on the blueprints of sixth generation aircraft. The F-22 is a 5.5 generation aircraft, and all the others, the main aircrafts in the West, the F-35, the Typhoon, or the Rafale, are all fifth generation aircraft. The war in Ukraine is also, even if Russia is not having the results that they thought they were going to have, having the second largest military might and force in the world against a country that is much smaller, much less populated, and much poorer. In spite of that, they have not been able to invade it and conquer it. But that doesn't mean that this war has not trained the Russian forces in a way that they could have earned experience for the future. Again, the consequence of this, and I think it's a positive one, is that countries that have extremely advanced armed forces and a very serious and deep culture of defense, that are Finland and Sweden have joined the Atlantic Alliance. And this is bad news for Russia. And that is one of their mistakes. I hope that President Trump understands that this is not a business. And I am not an anti-Trumpist. I am not at all somebody that doesn't like most of the things that Secretary of State Marco Rubio expressed in his confirmation hearings. I respect him as a politician and as somebody that has very seriously worked for peace and democracy in all parts of the world, but especially in Latin America, and trying to fight horrendous dictatorships, repulsive dictatorships as Nicaragua, Cuba, or Venezuela. I truly believe that the American foreign policy in respect to Russia has to be as firm and as objective as it is with China. Because China and Russia, even if China considers Russia a regional power, and that irritates the Russians immensely, Russia still has a more powerful military than the Chinese, not for long. The investments of the Chinese in global expansion of their military might and force is phenomenal. But there is a coincidence in foes and enemies, and that is more intensive and is stronger than the coincidence in interests or the coincidence in philosophy. And there is a coordination of actions, I wouldn't even call it an alliance, between Russia and China that is showing its face, especially in places like Latin America or the Sahel in Africa.
Mr. Ambassador, United Kingdom warned local companies on export risks to Armenia aimed Russian sanctions. Continuing talking about the expectations from Donald Trump's administration when it comes to the war in Ukraine, do you expect from the administration to have some similar decisions be made in order to counterpart Russia?
You know, to be very frank, what I believe is that we from the West are not going to get involved in the regional conflicts in Central Asia. We're not going to do that. But in any case, it is the sovereign choice of each nation to choose their allies and to choose their foes, their enemies. Armenia has chosen to be on the side of Russia. And Russia has chosen to be a rival, and I would even say an enemy of the West, and it's their choice. The West, after the Soviet Union imploded, after the Soviet Union disappeared, extended their olive branch in their hand to the Russians and told the Russians that they were welcome into the international community as a very important actor. Russia is one of the greatest nations of the history of mankind. There's no doubt about it. Russia has some of the best writers in history, some of the best musicians, some of the best philosophers, and some of the best scientists. Russia is an extraordinary nation, and a nation that I truly admire. But that doesn't mean that I admire their political system, their leadership, or their intentions. They have chosen to be aggressive against many countries in the region, and that includes your own country. And this is one of the reasons why whoever chooses to be on the side of Russia has chosen wrongly in the 21st century, and they have to face the consequences. If Armenia has chosen to be an ally, economic, strategic, or in any other field with the Russian Federation, they have to face those consequences because they're on the wrong side of history.
Mr. Ambassador, additional question to what you already said. Before just Donald Trump had his inauguration on January 20, we do remember that United States of America signed the strategic partnership agreement with Armenia. So how is it coincide with what you have just said? If Armenia is a close ally of Russia, then how we should understand the position of Washington?
Well, I think that Washington, that was a strategic alliance that was signed by a previous administration, and I think that, quite frankly, it was a mistake. And the recent skirmishes in your part of the world very clearly demonstrate that the only reason why Armenia was on the losing end of that battle is because the Russians were caught in in battles elsewhere, be it in Ukraine or trying to help their ally in the Middle East, a brutal dictatorship in Syria. But uh, I actually believe that it is very important to engage everybody, and I believe that the Armenians can reverse this proximity with the Russians, and they can actually act up and act on this strategic alliance that they have signed with the West, and let's hope that they actually become a country that believes in peace and stability in the region and that is not aggressive against its neighbors. I believe that Central Asia is one of the most crucial areas and regions in the world. Very, very ill known to even important international analysts, and probably the only important countries in the Atlantic Alliance, be it NATO, that are interested in what is happening in Central Asia are Poland and Germany, and to a lesser extent the other countries of Eastern Europe that are members of NATO. But what happens in Central Europe is essential to peace and stability in the world. And I am not saying that Armenia is going to be an enemy of the West. What I am saying is that Armenia needs to understand that if you are a democracy, you aspire to be a democracy, you need to be on the right side of history. The right side of history is reaching out to the West, embracing the values and principles of the West, not the Western geographic sense of the word, but I'm talking about the philosophical and political sense of the word. And this means that whomever is not in this philosophy is not an ally, a natural ally of yours, or shouldn't be a natural ally of yours. This is not just about circumstantial alliances for short-term tactical interests. This is about strategic survival of a nation looking into the 22nd century, not only tomorrow.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining our program today.
It's my pleasure. Hope to see you more.
Thank you very much. Just to remind, today with us we had Mr. Gustavo de Aristegui, former ambassador and former member of parliament. Dear viewers, do stay with A News. You watched Headlines. My name is Anastasiya Lavrina, and see you in the next edition.